Good afternoon. We're going to start on our third component of Chapter 2, or our third installment of Chapter 2, talking about production. So far in Chapter 2, we've talked about just what is an economy in general. We've gone into detail about the factors of production, how those could be or could not be utilized in the production process. And now we're going to get into and spend some time talking about the production possibilities curve, or as economists refer to it, the PPC. PPC is basically and as the book talks about, they're introducing you to maybe your first model. Maybe you haven't had many courses in economics, and for some of you it will be your first model, others it won't. But the chapter kind of approaches this as the first model and getting you used to the mindset of a first model. And basically what the production possibilities curve is it provides different combinations of a good or service that can be produced, and it specifically takes into account scarcity, opportunity cost, choice, trade-offs, all of the things we've been talking about, or many of the things we've been talking about in, either in Chapter 1 or so far in Chapter 2. And when you're looking at the production possibility curve, start thinking about, you walk into Starbucks and you're looking around, and they've got, you can either, as far as drinks go, maybe you can buy coffee and hot chocolate or coffee and tea. And basically what this production possibilities curve does is to try to manage this extremely complex and messy environment that economists attempt to function in, or try to develop, research, test hypotheses in. On the production possibility curve, they have taken it and reduced it down to two commodities, two products, two goods or services. One's graphed on the y-axis, one's graphed on the x-axis, and that point where the vertical and horizontal, or the y and x-axis meet, is considered the origin. And so it's only two goods or services. And to further simplify things, labor, capital, whether it be capital goods or financial capital, natural resources, technology, is all fixed. So in other words, if you're looking at trying to manufacture goods, and when you're on the production possibilities curve, it's not like either the individual, the entity, the economy that's trying to develop this PPC, they can't increase the labor, at least in the short run. So you're almost looking at it as a short run phenomenon. So can't increase your labor, can't increase your capital goods, can't increase natural resources that you use as ingredients in generating a good and service, and definitely can't improve or increase your production technology. And so we go back to the Starbucks example. Starbucks, the management at Starbucks would be comparing the opportunity cost, the trade-off, the scarce resources that are utilized in either producing coffee or producing hot chocolate, or again, coffee or tea. If you're thinking about, let's say you're thinking about Meharry, the medical center, you've got a group of individuals, or it may be the CFO, or it may be the CEO or COO, but somebody is making a decision on how these resources are going to be utilized. And if they are looking at trade-offs between cardiology and orthopedics, they are comparing and balancing these trade-offs to figure out what the opportunity cost is, or what has to be given up if you switch from, say, cardiology services to orthopedic services. And again, as the population and healthcare ages farther along that timeline and it gets older, these are going to be some significant decisions that the management team at Meharry are going to have to make. Want to do something simpler? You see, especially in regional economies, you see things like comparing on the X and Y axis, clothing and food. I think the example they gave in the text was a group making either skis or ski boards. So basically what the economists are doing, they're trying to compare the trade-off, scarcity, opportunity cost that a production economy is going to have to manage and incur as they try to determine how to develop the production responsibility or the production output between two commodities. One other thing that makes is very important on the production possibilities curve is that you have to keep two things in mind. If you're on the production possibilities curve, and that is the most efficient way to manage or to produce two different or two competing goods, and the trade-offs on those two competing goods is that economists make the determination that first, it has to be full employment. And when they say full employment, they're not necessarily, while they are talking about labor, it's not necessarily constrained to labor. It's full employment of all scarce resources, natural resources, capital, technology, any of those natural resources that are factors of production, they are fully employed. And secondarily, somebody or a group of somebodies are going to be making decisions on how those factors of production are incorporated into their production function to assure efficiency. And if you go back and look at the book, the production possibilities curve between y-axis and the x-axis, it starts out linear. So you've got an individual, let's say you've got a farmer outside of Columbus, Ohio, that's trying to determine, do they produce corn? Do they grow soybeans? And then that's going to be a linear straight line between those two goods and services. As you add additional economies that are producing or struggling with the similar decision between corn and soybeans, it's going to take that linear PPC and turn it into theoretically a concave production function. It's going to be a smooth function. It'll start out linear. As you add another economy to it, it's going to be a little bumpy. As you add another one, it's going to be a little bumpy, and another one, it's going to be a little bumpy, but at some point it becomes concave. And if it's concave, that implies that you are not only at full employment with all your factors of production, but you're also producing at the most efficient point of those factors of production. If you're at a point inside or between the origin and this concave PPC, if you're in that area that's inside, that is an inefficient process, which means you've either got some idle factors of production or you're not producing at the most efficient rate. And if you see a point, or you would like to be at a point outside of that smooth concave PPC, that's an unattainable combination of goods and services, simply because, as we stated earlier on, your factors of production are fixed in the short run when you're looking at this production possibility curve. And then what happens is, as you move along this production possibilities curve, you're talking about looking at what the opportunity cost is of going from product Y to product X, from the farmer moving from producing corn, producing soybeans. You're looking at the opportunity cost of making that move. And it's because it's a trade-off of a scarce resource and it's concave, it's going to be a negative slope to that line. So that's your opportunity cost of the trade-offs between those two goods and services. And basically it's saying, as you move along that production possibility curve, you're saying, I'm giving up, or I'm freeing up resources to move from corn to producing soybeans. And because there's a trade-off on those scarce resources, it is going to be a negative slope to that line. The other thing that you think about when you're looking at the production possibility curve is you're trying to find a situation where you as an economy, whether you're the farmer in Ohio, whether you're all the farmers in Ohio, whether you're all of the farmers within the United States, you're trying to find that point on that production possibility curve where you have a competitive advantage. And basically that's what it's saying is an economy has a competitive advantage if the opportunity cost of producing a good or service is lower than the opportunity cost of any other economy producing that good and service. So we'll get into why that's important a little later, maybe not in this segment, but in another segment as we move through chapter 2. And the other thing to keep in mind as you go down that production possibilities curve, you're looking at the law of increasing opportunity cost. And as you're moving that down that service, you're looking at the opportunity cost of giving up one commodity to produce another commodity. And again, as I've said, the PPC or the production possibilities curve is bowed outward, or you can say it's concave to the origin, whichever you feel more comfortable with. It has a negative slope because of the trade-offs and the scarce resources. And as I said earlier, it starts as linear, and then as you add more and more economies to the picture, it becomes that nice, smooth, concave or bowed out PPC. As I mentioned earlier, if you're on the PPC, you are in an efficient producing situation. Corn and soybeans, coffee and tea, cardiology, orthopedic services, you're at a point where you are fully utilizing your resources, and you are at a point where you are extremely efficient. Points between the origin and that bowed out curve, it's either inefficient or you've got scarce resources you aren't using. If you're outside that concave curve or that bowed out PPC, it's an unattainable point simply because you are fixed on your factors of production. You start thinking about the PPC and comparative advantage, and you start thinking about the United States. United States, when compared to most market economies, are extremely efficient in producing agricultural products because of just the amount of land we have, the favorable climate, the technology and automation we have, breeding programs for animals. All of these factors contribute to the United States being extremely efficient and a comparative advantage when it comes to agricultural goods and services. They talk about Hong Kong, very small area, but it is extremely competitive and has that comparative advantage when it comes to generating commerce. So everything kind of finds their niche and where their comparative advantage is. And again, we'll get into this a little later in chapter 2, is how that's important in international trade and other environments. And at some point in the document, she talks about Adam Smith, who depended on, your view of Adam Smith. Many people call him the father of economics, and whether he is or not, I'm not sure. But in his, I guess, seminal document, that Wealth of Nations, he talks about a division of labor. And when you're looking at division of labor, that's another way of saying specialization may be, and in most cases is, the most efficient utilization of factors of production and the most efficient way to generate that comparative advantage. Natural forces, some people contend, will always force economies toward that specialization and toward that comparative advantage. Because if you think about it, everybody specializes. Even you as a student, you're going to specialize in, what courses you're taking. If you're the medical center at Meharry, they're going to start specializing in what services they have. They're in competition with X number of hospitals in the national market. So, Vanderbilt specializes in one area, St. Thomas another area, Meharry in another area. So everybody is specializing, because remember, when we talked about 3 factors that I guess sets economics aside from other social sciences, we talked about opportunity cost, we talked about optimization, and we talked about making decisions at the margin. And when you're talking about specializing, you are starting to talk about optimization, and you're starting to talk about making decisions at the margin. You know, what is going to be the marginal impact of adding one more unit of something to your production output? If you think about that, since my background is in healthcare, I tend to use it a lot in examples. And if you think about healthcare just in general, there is a financial coin that everybody is struggling with in healthcare. You've got government, you've got health plans, you've got employer groups, you've got individual purchasers of healthcare goods and services that are trying to optimize that financial coin by minimizing the expenditures on healthcare services. The flip side of that coin is you've got the provider community. They're trying to optimize because they are trying to maximize the revenue and in turn maximize the return on their investment. And that's the other side of the financial coin. So you've got health plans, employer groups over here trying to maximize profits. You've got providers over here trying to maximize profits. And while profit is driving both sides of that financial coin, one side is trying to minimize costs, the other side is trying to maximize revenues. And so that's where we end up in the healthcare arena with kind of this dichotomy and kind of a situation where we're at odds with each other in both sides of that financial coin. And one last thought is, as we start to end this particular component of chapter 2 and talking about the PPC, is if you go back and you think about Meharry Medical Center, and Meharry is determined that with an aging population, they want to increase their cardiology goods and services, and they want to increase their orthopedic goods and services. So they think they're going to need to do a lot more total knee replacements, total hip replacements, surgical procedures on feet and ankles. And so as the population gets older, and Meharry, or at least whether it's the board of directors, again, the CEO, somebody at Meharry or some group of somebodies are making those decisions. They're making those decisions based on opportunity cost. They're making those decisions based on optimization because they want to optimize the total number of goods and services that they can provide to that consuming community. And in return for these goods and services, they want to make sure that the marginal revenue at the margin, the marginal revenue continues to be greater than the marginal cost. And in that case, drives the profit margins for the medical center. With that in mind, we'll end this session here, and we'll talk about in the next session some applications on the PPC. Talk to you soon.